Welcome to my deep dive exploration of the sultry Venus making her way through the practical Virgo. This begins on the 5th of August, goes through to the 29th. I'm going to share with you the characteristics of Venus, but what we can expect in Virgo, where she is in her fall. So not the best location, but that still doesn't mean there can't be opportunities. I'm going to share with you the exact moment that Venus arrives. We can take a snapshot of that, and that gives us an idea of what we can expect over the next few weeks. But also, I'll share with you the upcoming influences that Venus will create, particularly with Mercury on the 8th of August. That could be, despite Mercury's retrograde, very fortunate for some people. But there is some heavy weather coming too, but please stay with me. I will then go through each of the 12 signs, from Aries through to Pisces, to give you a flavour of what you can expect in terms of your ascendant, sun or the moon. If you're new to my channel, it's lovely to have your company. This is very much a community. If you have any thoughts, please feel welcome to share them. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap that bell notification symbol and help the channel to thrive. If you'd like to have a one-to-one with me, I am a consultant astrologer. Please see the link below where you can check out my testimonials. If you'd like to take advantage of my very unique special offer, I've launched the year 2025 personal horoscope forecast. You'll get the rest of 24 free, plus in my special package of 30% off, you can also get your life roadmap report. All of this will give you searing insights. It's fantastic value. Please see the link below for more. So Venus moves into Virgo at 2:23 a.m. Universal Time. The significance of this is that Venus joins up with Mercury, the ruler of the sign of Virgo, which is only a few degrees away. But Mercury is yet to start its retrograde, but that does happen later on Monday the 5th. Now, as I mentioned, they are going to come together in a conjunction on the 8th. And despite Mercury retrograde having the potential to definitely cause some glitches, we must think about Venus in terms of what it represents. So through the sign of Taurus, it's about money, self-worth, our values, the foundations of our life, our appreciation of good food. It's a very sensuous influence because of the earth rulership of Taurus. And it can also be where we enjoy a bit of luxury, or for other people a much more aesthetic approach to life, really liking to keep it simple. Eat organic vegetables, grow your own, recycle stuff. So it doesn't always have to be linked to luxury. But its rulership of the sign of Libra is very much about charm. It's very beguiling, even quite coquettish, and it can be about diplomacy, harmony, but relationships. But also Venus in Libra can be a tad superficial. So what can we expect in the sign of Virgo? Well, Virgo is an earth sign. It's ruled by Mercury, as I mentioned. It's very much about precision. It's about creating things that have some kind of tangible benefit. So people who have Venus in Virgo in their natal charts tend to be very practical, but particularly when it comes to relationships. Now, of course, it depends on what house sign their native Venus is located in. So if someone still had Venus in house 7 in Virgo, they'd probably still be very skilled at relating to people. But having Venus in Virgo is where people like to do good deeds in order to relate to people. So it may be someone who will make you breakfast in bed, or quite happily put some shelves up for you, or keep the place quite meticulously clean and tidy. That's their way of giving, but maybe not such a romantic vibe. And that, of course, can feed into that wider thing about Virgo, which can get caught up in the detail of things, finds it much more difficult to widen the lens, so therefore can be a bit, or seen or perceived as being a bit critical, nitpicky, and find it difficult to celebrate the things that we have in common, being more caught up with looking at what might not quite be exactly right. But Virgo Venus people tend to be quite reserved, quite cautious in terms of getting into relationships. But once they're in, and will really try their hardest to make things work out. So that's the flavour of Venus, the flavour that we can expect in Virgo. But what about the event chart as this event exactly occurs? So I'm sharing it initially from a solar perspective with the ascendant on the vernal point at 0 degrees Aries. And that's because we can all relate to this. And you can see that there's Venus, Mercury in house 6. So house 6 amplifies that Virgoan energy of being very focused on the details, being quite precise, being very discriminating, maybe looking for something from a situation. But if you look at the position of Pluto, it's in the sector of how we all connect, our network. It's in the sign of humanity, Aquarius, but it is in a retrograde. But if you look at the position of Neptune, it's so late in the sign of Pisces on the anaretic degree. Neptune and Pluto are in a perfect alliance, a wonderful sextile. And they're really asking us to rethink our approach to how we interact with one another, find a more spiritual dimension. So therefore, the pragmatism of Venus really jars against the position of Pluto and the position of Neptune. Neptune can be about idealism, but Pluto can be about power. So if we think about 6-11 power, if you don't see a future in a relationship, a romantic relationship, Pluto's making you aware of it with this finger of God. So there's the position of Venus right at the top of the finger, and then we have Pluto and Neptune both in a lovely angle to one another, but they're feeding back in what's known as a quincunx, so 150 degrees back to Venus. So it's not a great time to be idealistic about relationships, and we are going to be thinking about whether they're for the future. Now that can be professionally, because Venus in Virgo is very much about jobs, or how we get on with co-workers, whether we feel appreciated, recognised, heard, seen, valued, a very Venusian thing. Do we feel valued? We might not feel particularly heard or valued with that particular finger of God. Now let's look at the situation in terms of Placidus. Now my chart's based on universal time and Greenwich, not because I'm in the UK, but because of the prime meridian. And here we have Neptune right at the top of the chart, but we also have Saturn there right on that 10th house. So I think for us all, we're going to be thinking about jobs and how we connect to the wider world, because stern Saturn is asking us to be mindful of that, but also about how things feel, which is a Pisces principle. But there's the position of Venus in the 3rd house in terms of this Placidus chart with a Cancer ascendant. So that's saying that we need to think about getting or keeping the communication going. But what about Pluto? Well, ironically, it's in the house of relating, which Venus rules, the 7th house. So it's wanting to feel that there is some kind of give and take, which feels fair and just. So whether we're applying for a job, having an interview, doing a presentation, we're wanting to feel that we're recognised. So that's what we're leaning into with Venus being in the 3rd house. So it can be chatty, but it's also still going to struggle a little bit in order to perhaps get exactly what it wants because of that tendency for perfection. Now, what about the upcoming influences that we can expect? Well, the big one is the conjunction between the retrograde Mercury and Venus on the 8th. Now, Mercury retrograde occurs later on the 5th of August. As ever, it can cause some mischief, but particularly around the detail of things. So where we might take our eye off something, get caught up with the big picture too much and think something is not really worthy of looking at. It could be some paperwork, it could be an appointment, maybe it's something that's in our schedule that we overlook. And the 6th house can also be to do with things like health, fitness, diet. So actually, Venus moving through this area, if you want to be a bit keener in terms of shedding some weight, then Venus moving here and joining with Mercury would be a great time to scrutinize some new information which gives you some fresh insights. Mercury retrogrades can help us to reprise things in a positive way. But if we are in a job where it's not really feeling particularly good in terms of the atmosphere, perhaps we need to talk to someone else who would appreciate us. So that's the inference that we're getting on that event chart. But the combination between Mercury and Venus could be excellent if you have got the details together, if you're really on top of your brief, you know exactly what you want to say, and you're aware of what's important in terms of that detail, but also what's important in terms of relating. So that means the human connection. And I feel that Venus in Virgo can diminuate that. So it's very important for us all to work at that humanity. But there is still opportunities if you're having a discussion about something where you are really on the ball. Someone, despite the Mercury retrograde, can be impressed. But as the month goes on, Venus, to be honest, is going to forge some awkward connections. Not least, it's going to go face to face with Saturn. It's also going to square up with Mars, but also with Jupiter. Now that actually, despite it being a square, which can be tension creating and cause mischief in astrology, I actually thought it could be a good thing. It's just that Mars in the third house in Gemini could be a bit quick to promise to do something, to make a commitment, meet an obligation, which Virgo is very much about. So we mustn't rush our communications. I feel that that's particularly important in the last 2 weeks of August when Venus is in a square with Mars. But it could also be a time in a romantic context when the amount of information that we're sharing between one another increases, but actually it feels like it's a bit picky and actually a bit antagonistic. So there could be some arguments because Mars in Gemini can be very outspoken. But also we have the opposition, which is exact with Saturn on the 19th of August. If you have got a relationship that's bumping along the bottom and you don't see that long-term future, whether it is a job, whether it is with a colleague, a friend, or romantically, from the 17th to the 21st, you're really going to feel quite a chill impact on that relationship. And someone you may have got on well with before could actually become quite unavailable and distant. But there is a tremendous link with Uranus towards the end of this month. And if you are single, it may be that you could meet someone through your work who actually is really interesting and intriguing. It's just as the month comes to a close, Venus also goes opposite Neptune. So as much as someone may intrigue you, if they're a bit too mysterious and you're finding it a bit difficult to find out what they're really about, I would be very cautious indeed. So we have to be honest that Venus in Virgo is not its best transit. It's in its fall, can be a bit defensive, a bit prickly, a bit caught up with what's not quite working rather than seeing what is working. Finds it hard to celebrate the commonalities because we all have commonalities, and it can see us a bit antagonistic with the square with Mars, but there can be a cool breeze around all sorts of relationships at the heart of this month. And that finger of God, that yod, is really quite challenging in terms of thinking about the future, being idealistic, and then relating that back to what we're getting from relationships. So I think any relationship which isn't particularly chipper is going to be tested through the course of August. But please stay with me as I give you a flavour of what you can expect for your zodiac sign from now and through to the 29th, when Venus moves home into the sign of Libra and forges a quite glorious link with Pluto, but more on that then. So Aries, the question I want to ask you is, as the new moon dawned, which for you in Leo, very much about the 5th house, which can be about romance, is there a romance that you're hoping to develop with someone? Is there someone you've met relatively recently? Because what you're going to find over the next few weeks is that Venus could test it out a little bit. But if you do come through the month of August intact, you're going to go from strength to strength. And if you're in an ongoing relationship, the recent square between Venus and Uranus suggests that if there have been some tensions, it may be because things have become a little bit dull. And one of the ways that we think we can spice things up is to have a date night, do something more dramatic, more spontaneous, and all those things are true. But I feel one of the biggest passion killers is when there's not a fair share of domestic chores. So if you're the one who's toiling away, doing too much, and your partner's not doing their bit, what you can do over the next few weeks is really stand up what you want. Share with them what your expectation is. It may seem a little bit of a passion killer, but the more you feel that someone is doing the thoughts or gestures like getting in the washing just before it rains, perhaps putting the groceries away without being asked, doing their share of washing up, those kind of things in a living relationship, even if it's with your kids, if they're not really pulling their weight, your sense of peace and tranquility could be affected. So as much as we do have the energy of the sparkling new moon, suggesting that you can definitely come across at this time in a very dramatic and alluring way. I think for romance to really work for you, it needs to work for you in the sense of feeling respected and cherished. And that can be true even with those professional relationships. So if they think you're brilliant at work in terms of letting you work overtime all the time, but they're not brilliant at paying you for it or saying thank you, or you're very considerate in covering for colleagues, this is the time for you to put your foot down. Taurus, I'm really pleased for you that your ruler has moved into this part of its journey through the year. For sure, Mercury going retrograde later on Monday the 5th could create some changes of plans, some glitches. Maybe a date night that you're getting excited about can suddenly be off, but it could be you who makes that decision. Don't see yourself as only on the end of the astrology. You can use the astrology to guide your moves too. And Venus through the 5th house is about as glamorous as it can get. Now, you have a great appreciation of good clothes and the way you present yourself and can be extremely stylistic. But if you do feel that you're due for some kind of upgrade or makeover, why not treat yourself to it now? You could find that somebody that you are introduced to through your family or someone you meet in a location or a bar or a restaurant that you feel really comfortable in could be someone that you find very attractive over the next few weeks. And that beautiful link between Venus and Mercury, which peaks on the 8th, could be a time, despite the Mercury retrograde, when something works in your direction. But one of the things the new moon in Leo, which continues to provide its potent backdrop, is asking you to do is stay in touch with how things feel. And you may have found over the last week that you were much more outspoken to whoever it may have been if you didn't feel particularly heard or recognized. And that's because your ruler Venus was challenged by Uranus in your sign, which is pushing you to get in touch with the most authentic version of yourself. It's not saying that you weren't trying to be genuine. It may be that you need to just push through some conditioning when you were younger that asked you to conform to a particular way of being. Uranus is the planet of rebellion. So it's possible that you have had some kind of intense exchange of energy over the last few days. If that is the case, one of the great ways to try to make up would be to do something more social. Go to watch a play, a film, maybe a band. That kind of interactive, creative vibe could be absolutely wonderful for you. But you do need to still continue to nurture that part of you that the new moon is asking. Is very much about developing your sense of serenity, peacefulness, and a sense of nurture at the heart of your existence. So Gemini, Venus moving into your 4th house is really intriguing because your ruler Mercury is here, about to go retrograde. I could say to you that there could be some social interactions with your family members or your extended family, people you're really close to, and that's entirely possible because of the afterburn from the new moon is very much about communication, warmth and affection. But that Mercury retrograde suggests that maybe things won't be such a straight line over the next few weeks. But what I will tell you, in terms of Venus moving into this area, is if you're wanting to beautify your abode, you've got a brilliant cosmic window of opportunity now. And that can be through changing the paintwork, stripping down some old wallpaper, perhaps thinking about the fabrics of your soft furnishings and changing those, or perhaps buying some new furniture. If you're in the northern hemisphere, your outdoor space will really be something that can really ease your senses. So if you do get into the country and somewhere that's very tranquil, even near water, that could be something that works for you too. But Mercury retrograde also suggests that if you do work from home, there could be some niggles. So Venus in your 4th house is asking you to stay in touch with how things feel, despite the host being very much about discrimination, the details, and in essence about virtue. But if a family relationship hasn't been working so well, one of the things I would say is don't try too hard. You know, if you can get some dialogue going, all well and good. That could happen around about the 8th or the 9th. But later on this month, however much you try to be very sensitive to other people, because of the clash with Mars and Jupiter in your sign, and of Saturn and then Neptune in your 10th house, it may not quite work somehow. So it's going to be a little bit complex, I feel, over the next few weeks, but the Leo energy is still going to be predominantly to the fore. If you do want to invite people around, I think it needs to be the people that you genuinely feel really relaxed with. But even those plans could be changed at the last moment. But when it comes to decoration or getting into very beautiful locations, Venus in Virgo is perfect for you. So Cancer, for you, how you say things is going to take on a much greater value right through to the end of this month. Because there's an irony. Venus in the 3rd house gives us a greater allure. It means that we can express ourselves with greater delicacy, get our point across in just the right way that someone's quite receptive to what we have to say. It's just that Mercury in retrograde is a very sharp and rather potentially challenging influence to that potential for diplomacy. So you could find over the next few weeks that even if you feel you are being very, very diplomatic, someone could still get the wrong end of your proverbial stick. But just be aware too that if you are someone who writes for a living, if you do speak for a living, if you're someone who really enjoys karaoke, for example, you can absolutely be inspired with this transition. But the key with Mercury retrograde is to make sure that you're still thinking carefully about how the details are articulated. And if you are tempted to splash out on any new item that's to do with technology, 3rd house, then obviously be very, very meticulous in your approach. Don't get too caught up in the desire to have something, which could be quite strong. But if you are traveling anywhere, because the 3rd house can be short journeys, just be aware at the heart of this month, stern Saturn is opposite, so I wouldn't rush anywhere. Try to enjoy the scenic route and take your time. So Leo, for you, Venus moving into your 2nd house is glorious. This can be an opportunity to cash in. Something you've been working on for some time can come back to you, but you can't be too frivolous with the money. For no sooner has it gone in your pocket, you're splashing out by the middle of the month, and Saturn goes opposite, you'll be perhaps ruined spending out on something that actually doesn't have that practical benefit that Virgo so appreciates. And that's where Mercury's retrograde could be a good counterbalance. But if you have been on a strict diet, you may find anything remotely gooey and yummy extremely hard to resist through to the end of this month. And also your generosity of spirit could be very, very strong. And particularly with Venus squaring up with Mars in the second half of this month. If there is someone that you're really drawn towards, that you want to spoil with some kind of magnificent gesture, I wouldn't. I'd get to know this person slowly but surely. So you could have some fortune over money, but Mercury retrograde saying be very meticulous about how you marshal your resources and buy or transact things online. And if you do have money coming in, don't be too quick to splurge it. So Virgo, Venus moving into your sign is something I'm really pleased about for you, because there's been such a lot of energy in your 12th house. It's given you a lot of food for thought, but you've had that kind of paradox because Mars and Jupiter have been up high in the sky and suggesting that some people have become much more aware of you, aware of your talents and skills, but there's been another part of you that's wanted to cocoon yourself away. And that energy is not at a complete end. It will get so much easier for you from the 22nd of September when the Sun arrives home in your sign. But your ruler Mercury, set to go retrograde later on Monday the 5th, suggests that if there is a creative plan that's important to you, it may be a bit stop-start, because of course Mercury is going to invert back into the sign of Leo mid-month. So Venus in the first house is kind of saying to you, look, if there has been a relationship issue, particularly with the square with Uranus, and you have broken free, there may be part of you that does feel sad, upset, even distraught, but you do have a chance to draw a line in the sand and start again. But that could be a process, because the first house is the beginning of the journey. But also, Venus can be very much, particularly in the first house, about creativity. And if you've got talents that you haven't quite felt confident enough to showcase in the way that Mars and Jupiter have been pushing and prodding you to do, the next few weeks give you a chance to refine what you're interested in, particularly if you're a maker, and a lot of Virgos are brilliant makers. There could be something that you can refine. Now, once Venus meets your Sun in your natal chart, that's going to be a glow-up period for you, and that's something you can really celebrate. You could find that someone is going to show an interest in you, somebody new, if there has been a separation, or you've been alone for some while. If you're in an ongoing relationship, yeah, maybe there could be some clashes this month, I feel, because Saturn is opposite Venus as we go through this month, and maybe you're feeling more aware of how you express yourself, or your way of doing things doesn't always get a warm applause, and that can be quite challenging. Maybe there's more talking to be done, and of course Mercury retrograde makes it easier for us to stop talking, potentially, but it also gives us an opportunity to rethink what other people want from us. And that's the key. Saturn may be painted as the bad guy for you at the moment, but he can be a good guy if you're prepared to see that it's not all about how you feel it, it's how people see you. And if people are being a bit cool, maybe it's because they don't feel you're meeting their standards. That may be a little bit frank, but that's just the way it is with Saturn in the 7th house. So, right through to when it leaves full-time in 26, and goes into Aries, it's going to have that brief sojourn next year, you're going to get those counter energies keep checking you. So if you keep encountering some coolness or resentment or hostility, try to work out why that might be. Welcome Libra, so your ruler Venus moving into your 12th house. That's intriguing, because the 12th house is where we reflect, but the Sun and the new moon are really pushing you into the limelight, particularly around friends, group associations, your network, your long-term plan, with Mars and Jupiter also pushing you to be more adventurous and bring more excitement into your world. How will Venus play out? Well, I feel that one of the old-fashioned sayings that I could apply to this transit for you is, it's not how many friends you've got, it's the quality of them. So it's very much about quality, not quantity. So you may find over the next few weeks that even some of the people you've really been enjoying hanging out with recently can actually really lose their appeal. But all of this is preparing you for when Venus moves into your sign on the 29th, because then she's going to forge a magical alliance with Pluto, the first in our lifetimes, and it could be hugely transformational for you. But things can remain very friendly, positive and sociable for you with that new moon energy. You're just being asked really to be a little bit more discriminating, which is a very Virgoan energy about who you really open up to and show your vulnerability to. Now, the other part of having Mercury retrograde is it is possible that someone from your past could come back into your thinking. Maybe you're going to do a search on social media to find out what they're up to. Maybe you feel there's still some unfinished business. When relationships break down, it does require a lot of shifting on both sides, usually, in order for it to recommence. So even the person who feels that maybe they weren't treated very well has to forgive that past behaviour. So it's a complex thing. So I wouldn't say loosely that someone's bound to come back into your life. I think it's far too trivial. But it's a possibility. And one thing you could be is hugely nostalgic for someone from your past, whether they're with us anymore or not. Scorpio, Venus has moved into your sector of friendship. Is there a friend that you're really drawn to? Will it be friends with benefits? Or is it a case that you have some friends and maybe one of them is starting to inch up on your consciousness as being a potentially important partner? But then, you know, Venus moving into the 11th house doesn't have to be romantic. It's possible that you're going to be spending more time socializing with people you work with, because you've still got the sun resonating that energy in a very powerful part of your chart to do with recognition. And to build up that recognition, it may mean that you've got to attend some events. Some of it could be a bit fluid because of Mercury retrograde. One friend that you thought was the proverbial bee's knees could disappoint you over the next couple of months, I'll be honest with you. But there can be other people that you start to realise that you've got more things to celebrate that you've got in common than keeps you apart. And maybe that's true also of a relationship that you have at the present time, because your modern ruler Pluto clashes with the entrance of Venus to Virgo in quite a bruising way. And perhaps part of the reason for that is you want to be more sociable, a partner wants to stay closer to home, or vice versa. And the thing with Venus in the 11th house, along with Mercury's retrograde, is try to keep those lines of communication open. And the more you keep reminding yourselves about the things you do enjoy sharing, rather than the bits that aren't so good, the Virgo precision, the better you're going to work with this energy. So Sagittarius, Venus is crested right to the top of your chart. This makes it very visible. Don't underestimate how charm can take you far. Now, charm may be something that you feel is a bit uncool, but we can all be very sincerely charming by just being conscious of the people we connect to. So whether that's professionally, we're just relating into them, that's not necessarily being disingenuous and a bit synthetic. Mercury, of course, is retrograde from later on the Monday. So if you don't have such a good relationship in your work environment, and with the energy still permeating out of Leo, which is very much about being more adventurous, and you're not really feeling the connections in your professional relationships, this could be a bit of a tough month, to be honest, because of Mars and Jupiter and Saturn. Saturn in your 4th house of emotion, Mars and Jupiter in your 7th house of relationships, clashing with the position of Venus as it progresses through Virgo. But maybe it's going to see you develop some new alliances, keep things more fluid. So even if you do feel a bit stuck and you do want to escape something that's not quite working for you, it is going to be important, for example, to leave an existing role on reasonable terms. If you can use that sense of diplomacy that comes from Venus's rulership of Libra, I think that's a smart thing to do when it comes to your professional situation. But what about love? Well, love in the 10th house is when we can make the big decision to move in, buy a property together, get spliced if you're a little bit more that way inclined. So it just depends, because the 10th house is where we're really taking it more seriously. But Mercury retrograde is the counterpoint. So if you are wanting to take that next step forwards into a deeper commitment, I just wouldn't expect it to happen this month. Wait until September. So Capricorn, Venus moving into your 9th house is brilliant if you're set to travel with someone you're fond of over the next few weeks. Perhaps you're going to meet someone on a vacation. But of course, with Mercury retrograde in the 9th house, there could be some surprises along the way. Let's think about the 9th house as opposed to just the Virgoan energy. The 9th house is where we aspire to something that is a bit more philosophical. It's our higher truth, if you like. So if you're in a relationship where you feel that someone's not entirely straight with you, you don't clearly know where you stand, that could be something that rankles. With Mercury retrograde from later on Monday, your desire to tease out the truth is going to be that much greater. But if you are traveling somewhere, you could meet someone who really enriches your holiday, your vacation, and maybe you're going to have a little bit of a fling, particularly with Venus and Mars going into a square in the last 2 weeks of this month in August. But just be conscious that if you are in an existing relationship, how you exchange points of view with one another is going to possibly become quite tense by the 19th of this month, when your ruler is going to be opposing the position of Venus, but also in that very, very testing right angle with the position of Jupiter. So I feel that if something isn't flowing quite so well in terms of feeling it's a sense of a relationship that you have a respect for their values and their opinions, that I feel you can get through. But if you are with someone where it is more difficult, there's a harshness about that other person that you find quite grating, that could become more obvious over the next few weeks. But of course, Venus is about money. It could be you're going to be thinking about some kind of overseas connection, something to do with travel, to do with your work, or also in the mix. So Aquarius, Venus moving into the 8th house could be really exciting for a business opportunity, particularly when she meets up with Mercury on the 8th. That's if everything's in accord. You're really relating well, because the power of the new moon in Leo is all about finding connections and accords, meeting people in the middle. So if you're working with people who are really reasonable, I feel you could seal a deal despite the fact that Mercury is retrograde. Because Mercury retrograde in the 8th house could be that you're going to do some financial planning to tease out some more value from really diving down deep and looking at the minutiae. Venus can help you like that. But in terms of relating, Venus in the 8th house can be very much to do with intimacy, sensual intimacy. So really getting up close and personal. And if there's someone you have that with, then that could be something to enjoy. If that's lacking, or you find it difficult to agree on your values or money, by the 19th, it could all come up to a powerful boil, and it may not necessarily be easy. But if you can, the new moon in Leo is asking you to try to keep listening, try to keep attuning. Don't give away your power by being too agreeable, but there may be a discussion, particularly around a contractual, financial, or business matter that may go on for much of this coming month, but you could have a sensational outcome by the 29th, when Venus moves into your sister air sign of Libra, the sign it rules. So Pisces, for you, Venus moving into your 7th house is one of the best positions Venus can be in a natal chart. Now, obviously, in the sign of Virgo, it is muted somewhat. The earthiness and the coolness of the sign of Virgo takes a little bit of the warmth and glamour away, but it's a great location to try to meet people in the middle, to have those opportunities to build goodwill, give and take. It's not all about what we want, it's what we're prepared to give. But it is true that with Mercury in this location too, we've got two competing influences. One's very positive, constructive, Venus. One's potentially more challenging. So there could be a lot to discuss over the next few weeks, particularly with Saturn in your sign having a big say. If you've met someone and you're enjoying it, Venus here could build something up. But it is going to be important for the communication to be flowing, and that comes from Mercury. However much we want to relate to someone, they've got to relate back to us. And of course, we also have Jupiter, your traditional ruler, in the mix as well, along with Mars. So we're going to have a T-square, essentially, around about the 19th, and that is going to create a potential for challenge. But if there is a situation where you feel someone's coming from the right place, even if they don't always get it right, then the generosity of spirit of Venus is encouraging you to take that road rather than thinking it down.